Hi there, it's Bike Touring Mike here. Over the next 10 weeks or so, I'm doing a series where I'm going over all of the basics of bike touring. And in this, the second video, we're talking about what to look for when buying your first touring bike. So by watching this video, you'll learn everything you need to know about what makes a good touring bike and what pitfalls to avoid when buying one. So bike touring is a bit different than road cycling, since you're probably spending anywhere from 5 to 8 hours each day out on the road. You're more interested in having a bike that's comfortable instead of a bike that's really fast. So the geometry of a touring bike is a bit more relaxed than your ordinary touring bike. And you can see that with my touring bike behind me here, that the top tube is a bit tilting up towards the handlebar, and the saddle and the handlebar is almost level as well. So most touring bikes are made of steel, but there are still some that's made of aluminum. The benefit of having a steel frame is that it's more stable, and it makes for a smoother ride since it kind of takes up the bumps of the road, and it's also easier to repair if you were to have a break in the frame. You can weld a frame that's made of steel, but it's more difficult to do so with a frame made of aluminum. On the minus side, it's a bit heavier, but since you're already loading a bunch of stuff onto your bike, maybe that's not as important. Touring bikes also have a long chainstay, and this is good for a couple of things. First of all, it creates more distance between your shoe and the pannier, so when you're pedaling, there's no risk of your heel striking the pannier back here. With a road bike, this chainstay is a lot more narrow, so if you were to put panniers onto your road bike, you would probably hit the pannier when you're pedaling. Another plus of having a long chainstay is that you also get a longer wheelbase, which means the distance between the two hubs of the wheels, and this provides for a more stable ride when you have a lot of things loaded onto your bike. Another thing you want to look for on the frame is that the frame has a lot of eyelets. That means that it's easy to mount racks, fender, as well as bulb cages on to the bike. So you want to look for these on the frame itself, as well on the forks and around the dropouts. A lot of touring bikes come with a mountain bike group set, with a triple crankset in the front and a 9 or 10 speed cassette in the rear. So if you go out trying the lowest gear, you're probably thinking that I'm never gonna use those granny gears. But once you're on a fully loaded touring bike, you're sure glad to have them. So if we're talking gears on a touring bike, lately internal hub gears such as pinion and roll-off has become really popular. These have a big benefit, and that is that they require basically no maintenance when you're out on your bike tour. But it also comes with a price. Usually these systems will run you about $1,500 extra on top of the cost of your touring bike. And there's also a big drawback, and that is if something were to go wrong with the gear hub when you're out on your bike tour, that would probably mean that your bike tour is over, since you would probably have to send the gear hub back to the producer. So if the same thing were to happen if you have a traditional derailleur system, you can probably have a look at it yourself or just drop by the nearest local bike shop, and they will probably help you out in a couple of hours or so, and you're able to continue on your bike tour. It's important to have a sturdy wheel to be able to withstand the forces that all the gear that you're loading onto the bike creates. So my recommendation would be to go for a wheel with 36 spokes. So regarding tires, there's only really one way to go here, and that is to go for a puncture resistant tire. These puncture resistant tires are a bit heavier, but as you're carrying a lot of gear onto your bike, it really doesn't matter if the tire weighs a couple of extra grams. On the plus side, having a puncture resistant tire means that you almost rule out the chance of having a flat tire. And by far, I think that makes up for having a bit of a heavier tire. Regarding tire width, my recommendation would be to go for a tire that has at least 35 or 37 millimeters of tire width. That makes for a smoother ride, and it also helps avoiding getting those nasty pinch flats. So the next thing we're gonna take a look at is what type of brakes you should go for on your touring bike. Should you go for disc brakes or rim brakes? And of course, as with everything else, there are drawbacks and benefits with each of these. If you start off with rim brakes, there are a lot of benefits with those. First of all, they're really inexpensive, and it's really easy to spot if there's wear on the brake pad itself. It's also rather easy to switch out the brake pads, and you can usually find replacement parts really easy. But there are drawbacks with having rim brakes as well. First of all, they don't have as much stopping power as disc brakes, and they also don't work as good in wet conditions. The third drawback of having rim brakes is that over time the brake pads are gonna start wearing out the rim itself. So after a couple of years, you're probably looking at having to replace that wheel. So if we take a look at disc brakes, as I have on my bike, these have more stopping power and they're also more reliable in wet conditions. But the drawbacks are that the parts are more expensive and it's more difficult to service these brakes when you're out on the road. And it can also be a bit tricky to get hold of the exact correct brake pad for your bike. So if you're going out on a bike tour, it's always good to have a spare part of brake pads with you. In the end, it really comes down to what type of touring you're planning on doing. If you're in a mountainous region with a lot of rain, as in Norway, my suggestion would be to go for disc brakes. But if you're doing a lot of touring in flat land, when you don't need as much stopping power as here in Sweden, my suggestion would be to go for rim brakes. Another thing to reconsider when buying a touring bike is what type of handlebar you're looking for. So the main types of handlebars on a touring bike is either a drop bar or a flat bar. The benefit of having a drop bar, as I do on my bike, is that you have several different hand positions. If you have a flat bar, having your hands in the same position all day, let's say for 5 to 8 hours, means that you're probably gonna get a lot of numbness and aches in your joints, hands and neck area. So being able to switch these hand positions is probably a good thing. And lately a lot of different sort of hybrid models of handlebars has come out on the market, such as Jones bars and butterfly bars. So these kind of take the best out of both worlds. You still have a flat bar, but you're able to switch the position of your hands to be able to avoid those numbness and aches that I talked about. So fenders are also a thing to reconsider when buying a touring bike. If you're just going out on your Sunday ride with your road bike, fenders are not as important, since you can probably choose when you want to go out on your Sunday tour. But if you're on a bike tour for, say, a couple of weeks, you're probably gonna encounter some sort of rain during that time. So having fenders on your touring bike is probably gonna save you both time and some hassle as well, since you don't have to put a lot of time into maintaining your bike after a rainy day and cleaning off all of your panniers and rain jacket and so on. Putting fenders onto your bike is normally a pretty easy thing to do. But what you should look for is that you have enough tire clearance that you're able to fit both your tire and the fender in your specific bike frame. So in the last video we talked about the importance of getting a nice saddle for your touring bike, since that is the main contact point between your body and the bike. And you're probably sitting numerous of hours on that saddle each day when you're out on a bike tour. I myself have a Brooks B17 saddle, and this is a really nice but expensive saddle. It's kind of stiff, and over time it sort of shapes itself after your anatomy, so it creates a perfect fit between you and the bike. But please take that time when you're doing your research on saddles for your touring bike. It's really important that you find a nice saddle that fits you well. Usually when you buy a touring bike, pedals are not included in the package, so you will probably have to buy these extra. I've already done a video on the topic of what type of pedals I recommend for bike touring, so if you click the link up in the corner, I'll see you in that video. Until next time, have a good one.